I'm excited to be up here today to talk with you about what Xcel Energy is doing in terms of risk management and how we're using APM to really manage risk and use risk to inform decisions. I've got quite a bit of content that I want to cover today, and so let's just get into it here with the agenda. So I'm going to start with some background on Xcel Energy, who we are, what we do, and specifically why asset performance management is so critical for our company and for our industry today. And then I'll get into the meat of the topic around risk management and how we quantify risk and how we categorize it and then how we use it in our workflows and the keys to success that we've seen in our company. And then I'll end with some lessons learned over the last 2 years and hopefully leave some time for questions at the end. So some background on Xcel. So we're a regulated utility that provides natural gas and electricity to our customers. We operate in the 8 states that you see there in dark gray. And then the red area is really our service territory. And so in that red area, we've got 3.8 million electricity customers and 2.2 million natural gas customers. I've also provided a chart down at the bottom right, and that shows our generation mix as of the end of last year. So right now, we only have about 19% of our capacity in coal generation. We've got 30% for natural gas, and then now the biggest piece of that pie is wind at 32%. That has changed significantly in the last 5 years and will continue to change. By 2031, essentially all of our coal plants will be retired, and we're adding a significant amount of wind, solar, and battery storage. And I wanted to bring that up because that's very critical and a big reason why APM is really, really important for us. And so I want to get into that a little bit more. So this is a chart showing the 3 major types of maintenance. I don't think this is new to anybody. We've got run to failure on the left, we've got time-based maintenance in the middle, and then condition-based maintenance over on the right. If you rewind back in Xcel Energy's history and go back 10 years ago and into our past, for us, and I believe this is pretty common for the utility industry in general, we had a very defined time-based preventative strategy. That really results in a middle of the road type reliability and cost, and that worked for us. That was effective. It met our business needs, it met our customers' needs. And a lot of that has changed in the last decade, and specifically in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, we've seen tremendous pressure from our stakeholders, essentially our customers, our shareholders, our regulators, all the interveners that have a say in what we do as a company. There's a lot of pressure to bring costs down. So that's been a pressure on our organization, and then that coupled with the fact that we're growing the next generation of energy. We're adding in a lot of wind, a lot of solar, and we're not retiring our legacy sites as fast as we're adding in the renewable capacity. And that's on purpose. But what that leaves us with is we're essentially managing 2 portfolios at the same time. So we have a bigger asset base, we have more assets to maintain and operate, but we need to reduce cost. So those 2 things together are a really hard, challenging situation for us. And the easiest, obvious thing to do is to cut maintenance and move to the left side of this spectrum. Obviously, that's not really where we want to be. So about 5 years ago, my organization was formed with the sole purpose to shift us to the right side of this spectrum, where we have intentional maintenance strategies designed around failure modes. We can monitor equipment really well. We understand risk to inform our decisions and essentially do the right maintenance on the right equipment at the right time. If we can do that effectively, that's where reliability is going to be high and we can reduce cost. And that is exactly what our organization, our company needs to be successful. Now, I think a lot of you in the room probably have been on this journey and understand this and know that this is not something that you can just do overnight. And it depends on your starting point. And so we've been working on this the last several years, and we realized pretty quick out of the gate that it's not realistic for us to do this for all of our power plants, right? We had to really think hard about where are we going to focus this effort and make sure that the effort aligns with the mission that these sites provide to our company. And so what we did is we categorized our 80-some units in our fleet into 5 different categories, from platinum to steel. And the whole idea there is, what is the sole mission of these assets, and does it align with the APM approach? And our platinum, gold, and silver sites are that future generation. There are renewable assets, there are gas plants, our gas turbines, our combined cycle sites, and some of our conventional fleet that is not retiring in the near future. And we even have a targeted approach for those sites depending on the need and the time to value based on the effort you put in, where we're going to focus and prioritize and invest. So I'd highly recommend this for anybody. Prioritize your sites just like you prioritize your assets, and go after, the most valuable ones. All right, so let's get into asset performance management and what it is. Asset performance management is definitely a methodology, and you can leverage technology to carry this methodology out more effectively. But you have to understand what the methodology is anytime you're deploying any sort of APM software solution. And so when I talk about that, I use what's called this APM wheel. And I start on the left talking about risk. The very first thing is to define asset criticality, and then understand the failure modes of your equipment. Those two together help to inform what your strategy is. You then execute that strategy in the field. And then the bottom half of this wheel is really where the power of technology comes in, where you can integrate disparate data sources on your equipment into one place, perform analytics on that data with the goal to understand more real-time risk so you can use it in more real-time decision making. And if you can do that, you can really optimize the strategy and the maintenance that you do and continuously improve. So that is what APM is, and in Xcel in the last several years, we've been implementing every aspect of this methodology. But today, I want to focus primarily on risk and how we quantify risk and how we use risk information. So there's a lot of different ways to quantify risk, but these are the 3 major categories that we use specifically in APM to understand risk. And so the first category is maintenance strategy execution. And so if you go through all this effort to understand how critical your assets are, you understand failure modes, and you define the optimal strategy on that asset, if you don't execute that strategy, that's a risk. You have failure modes that are vulnerable, and you need to make sure that you address those failure modes. The middle category is health. This is the obvious one, where there's a lot of data you can collect on your equipment to understand health and condition. And then the third one on the right is previous failures. There's a lot of different ways you can understand previous failures, either on the asset in question or learning from failures that occur across your fleet. And that's something that I want to dive into a little bit more. So this is a specific tool that we've built in APM to help us better learn from the failures that are occurring in our organization. And so specifically for power generation, anytime we have like a lost generation event, we have to do what is called NERC GADS reporting. So we have to submit to NERC and tell them the time and the details of these events where we tripped a unit offline or we couldn't produce as much power as we're supposed to. We use APM to do that reporting in a module called GAA. The problem though is that data set is not very rich. It doesn't really tell you a lot about these failures, and you can't really learn a lot from it. So we built a tool that bolts on to that data, which is essentially a form that folks at the plant fill out to add additional information about these failures. And so there's a series of questions that we ask around, was there an issue with services or material quality that contributed to this failure? What was the specific failure mode that may have caused this failure? Did you have the wrong monitoring in place? Did you have the wrong maintenance strategy in place? Was cycling or extreme cold weather a contributor? Do we need to have better training or better procedures on the performance aspect of things? We glean a lot of information now from these failures, and the idea is we build a database that we can learn from and analyze and understand more systematically across our fleet. What are the top issues that we need to go after and deploy systematic corrective actions? So that's one use of this tool. The other use, back on the aspect of risk, is tracking the specific actions that we need to take to ensure that these failures don't happen again, to mitigate that risk. And so we use APM and recommendations to track that. So when we have a failure and we need to update a procedure, we put a recommendation into APM directly assigned to that event to track that. We've also implemented a new process in the last year to share more broadly across our fleet, so we don't just learn at a site level. So now we have a committee that looks at these more consequential events and reviews those for opportunities to share and learn. And the learnings from those events are shared across operations, across our fleet. And then corrective actions are created broadly across multiple sites to address risk associated with a failure at one site. And we use recommendations in APM to track that. So that's important because in a minute here, I'm going to talk about how everything rolls up into the big picture of risk. And those recommendations and those actions are a pretty critical piece of that. All right, so this is a very busy slide, and I'm not going to go over the specific details of this. If anybody has any questions about the details, feel free to reach out to me. But this is the overall picture of how we quantify risk in APM. So we start with what's called the equipment health workflow. So this is a GE-provided workflow in their content. And we partnered with them a couple years ago to expand on that. And what that does is it brings all the data into one place and it calculates a health score. It's a numeric composite score for the health that we then combine with criticality to quantify risk. And we have a series of dashboards that can tell you for a site or potentially for a region what's your highest risk and what's your lowest risk based on all this data that's coming in. And you can see I've got the 3 different colors for the 3 different categories that I talked about earlier. And so the one on the far left there, that's the dark blue. That is the maintenance strategy execution. And so what we do is we bring in PMs from our CMMS system, and we're looking at, are there PMs that are overdue? Have we had poor PM compliance? That tells us whether or not we're executing on the strategy. The middle part is health. And I'm not going to go over all the details, but there's a lot of data we bring in, like operator rounds. We do operator rounds in APM, vibration data, oil data. We bring in alerts and cases from our M&D center that uses Smart Signal. All of that data comes into one place to help understand the health of equipment. And then that final one in light blue is where we tie in essentially previous failures and understanding where we have risk associated with those. And so again, back to that event learning process, we create recommendations to track the actions we need to take to mitigate risk. The last thing we want is to put all these actions into a black hole and they never get looked at. This is our mechanism to track whether or not we're actually completing those actions, and if we're not, we're going to elevate the risk on the equipment. So that's that feedback loop to make sure that we understand risk associated with these actions. I didn't talk about failure elimination. That's another process that we use where we have a series of dashboards. Again, that's content delivered through GE that tells you the high bar issues in terms of number of work orders, cost of those work orders. You can generate an RCA directly from that workflow and create actions that you need to take to address risk. Again, those actions can come directly into this workflow and be part of the big picture. Now, all this is great, but if you just have a bunch of dashboards with a lot of information and you don't really have the right people, the right processes, the right organization around that, you're not going to get value out of it. And so that's been the biggest focus for us in the last several years, is making sure that we have the right organization, the right workflow for this to be successful. This is a diagram showing that workflow. Everything on the left is essentially what I just talked about. All that data that's coming into APM that we collect and combine with criticality, and then that populates on a series of dashboards. And for us, there's really 3 major venues where we can talk about this information. One is like in a daily plan of the day type meeting, where you can discuss at a plant level what are some of the new risks associated with operator rounds that happened last night on shift. What are some of the new notifications that were created? Do we have any changes in risk that we need to be aware of at a site level? This can be discussed also during weekly planning scheduling meetings, as you have a long list of work that you need to do. This information can help inform, what you prioritize for that week. And then the final one is our monthly reliability meetings, and this is really where we've seen the most value. And the reason for that is a lot of the data that we have in APM is intentionally meant to be very proactive, very long-term risk management, as opposed to day-to-day risk management. And so in these monthly reliability meetings, we have our reliability engineers and our plant managers come together, and the goal is to talk about risk. Talk about what the top 10 risks are at each site, and specifically what are we doing together as a plant to mitigate those risks. And then again, we use recommendations in APM to track those actions, and then we can really insert those into regular processes around the large capital and O&M projects that we need to do. Where are we going to invest? How are we going to prioritize? How are we going to make sure we get the funding in the right place and we do the right work? So that's our workflow. And like I said, with the dashboards, if you don't have the right workflow, the dashboards don't mean anything. Same goes for the workflow. If you don't have the right organizational structure in place, the workflow will break down. And so that's something that I want to share with you guys as one of the keys to success for Xcel that I believe we've done well with. And I'm talking specifically on this slide about engineering. Operations is very, very critical, and they are a piece of this whole puzzle. And without operations really being involved and bought in, you're not going to be successful. However, engineering is really leading and driving this through our organization, and we have kind of a unique setup that I wanted to share that I think has been really valuable for us. So starting with dark blue, that is equipment and system analytics. So that is an engineering team that is not in the plants. They have plant background. They've worked in plants in the past, in most cases, but they're not in the plant. So they don't get caught up in the day-to-day breakdowns and the day-to-day operation, and they're completely dedicated to implementing that APM wheel. So they're dedicated resources to make sure that Everything on the left of this workflow gets created. Right? There's a lot of effort to get all the data where you need it to. Define asset strategies. That is a dedicated team in equipment and system analytics. The purple team is monitoring and diagnostics. So we do have a separate M&D team that uses GE Smart Signal, and they have for about 10 years now. That's a very critical element for us to really be proactive and shift to the right side of that spectrum. Without this team, we wouldn't have the right monitoring in place to really effectively do that, so that's very critical for us. Next I want to talk about is reliability engineering. So ESA and M&D, they both roll up through my organization. Reliability engineering does not. And reliability engineering is primarily our site engineers that are at our power plants that report up through a central engineering director. Rewind about a year ago, those site engineers were primarily maintenance engineers. In our industry, reliability engineers are not a common thing. They're more focused on the breakdowns that are there in front of them for that day and not necessarily looking at what could break in the future. And that was definitely a barrier that we saw. We had this great tool, we had these workflows, we had the ability to understand where risk was, but we did not have the time and the people to actually solve the problems and reduce risk. And so we made an intentional decision to place specific dedicated reliability engineers at the sites that we're doing this for. And these are the boots on the ground that we partner with, an extension of my team, to make sure that we effectively implement APM on site. I put a star by that because that's really what can make or break us, right? That team is so critical. Those individuals are some of the most senior, experienced engineers that we have at our sites. And we created a principal engineering role just for that because we believe in this so much, and we believe it is that critical to have the right people in those roles. So that's a pretty big one for us. And then the other team is asset strategy and budget integration. That's another group that rolls up through me. It's kind of a unique team that really takes all the requests from all of our plants on what work they want to do, what projects they want to do, what they want to invest in. And this group helps to prioritize that money across the fleet. We only got so much money, so where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck? They're very critical here because they make sure that we implement the strategies that we define. They make sure that we prioritize off of risk and not off of people's opinions. That's definitely been a big element for us, and all four of these teams are very critical for our success. So I can highlight that here quick with a very simple example where in our combined cycle sites, historically, we did time-based maintenance on our boiler feed pumps. So we'd overhaul those about every 6 to 9 years. Our current state now is condition-based maintenance. So we can plan these overhauls and prioritize them at least a year in advance, which is important for us for our budgeting purposes. So how did we get there? So looking back at the 4 different teams, starting with equipment system analytics, they defined the strategy. They determined the failure modes. They made sure that we had the right instrumentation in place and deployed new instrumentation so we could better monitor the equipment. They got all that data into APM and into our M&D center so that we can better monitor these pumps. Our M&D center built better, more sophisticated models on mechanical health and for performance for the pumps. Then our reliability engineers can take all this information in APM in one spot and understand, do we have risk associated with our pumps? Are they underperforming? Do they have high vibration? Do they have high particulate count in the oil? They can take that and submit projects accordingly to that asset strategy and budget integration team. That team can then use the risk information that we provide through reliability engineering to understand if we can only do 3 pumps in our fleet next year, what 3 are we going to do based on this data? So that's how that's worked for us and how we've been successful. All right, final slide I've got here. Lessons learned, and this is just in general with APM, not necessarily tied to risk. One of the things I brought up with prioritizing assets, we categorized into 5 different categories. I highly recommend that you all think about that and think about what is the purpose that these sites provide to our business, and make sure that APM aligns with that. We have sites where we are intentionally not investing in, that are not running very much, that we don't need to be reliable, so we don't need an APM program. I know that probably sounds obvious, but we kind of overlooked that in the beginning, so I just wanted to share that lesson with you. Second one here is organizational. The way that your organization is structured is very, very critical. Again, we have dedicated resources that can build and sustain this program that don't get tied into the day-to-day, but we also have boots on the ground that are trusted and respected that can help implement outside of a centralized engineering team. Next one is focus on the quick wins to show value, and looking back on our journey. The 3 that I have listed here are probably the areas that I think we could have started with to show that quick value. One was operator rounds. We were already doing operator rounds on paper, so just adding a digital tool on top of that is a quick way to show people how that can help streamline our processes and provide better analysis of data. Vibration has been huge for us. We didn't do a whole lot of vibration routes previously. Like I said, we were right in the middle. We did a lot of time-based maintenance. We didn't do a lot of condition monitoring. And so we deployed several thousand instruments for vibration monitoring, and we've seen a lot of payback from that. We've identified a lot of issues and a lot of failures early that we were able to address. That showed pretty quick value early on. And then the third one here is our M&D center. And for us, our M&D center is very mature. They've been around for 10 years. They have a very good data set that helps the plants understand where they have early failures that are occurring. And just getting that information into the overall APM lens as soon as possible is a data set that people trust, and it's a great way to see that information, so I wish we would have done that sooner. On the flip side, avoid starting with programs or tool sets that create a lot of work for people, right? So if you heard in the change management panel earlier today, we had to start with asset criticality. It was a ton of work for people. And on top of that, we also rolled out that event learning process. And so this was a form that people had to fill out that they never had to do before. And so APM immediately got tagged as this initiative that's just creating work for people. And I really wish we would have not rolled those out at the same time. And then finally, use KPIs, if you can, at a corporate level to really align and help to prioritize and set the expectations around the effort.